Start recording. Zoom meeting back up. Okay. Everybody's legs properly stretched. Gotta stand it.
Yeah.
Record, Greg. Who sent this? This is Emily. I was like, it was funny because I hadn't put you in the phone yet, but it said, this may be coming from Emily. And I was like, what? So, I don't want to save it. So, okay. So we're recording. All right. So I have two more things I kind of want to go over today. One is I want to talk about this step to the side exercise, right? We basically have a week to do it, and it's pretty simple, right? But really, it's very important to think about, right? Like this is really the building blocks of this entire class is something that we all take for granted, which is how we as humans, how we as this like connection of interconnected parts, right? How we interact with the physics of the world around us, right? And I know that a lot of that you go over portions of that in animation fundamentals class, and I'm sure you get a lot of time to think about that. But I really just want to boil this down to the physics of what keeps us standing, right? Like what keeps us from falling over. So we're going to do that by, like that was initially the point of the project one project. The problem with that is you'll start to get bogged down with other elements of that project. And I really wanted to boil this down to something simpler, something that we could do in class together, and you could literally be doing it while I'm talking, or you could do it after I'm talking, just so like it doesn't even have to be something you're keeping. It could be something you're throwing away later, but you could really start to explore what's going on with body mechanics and how do we make that look good, right? So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So we're going to do that, and then something else that I usually like to do in this class, because this is a really hard and important class. So I also have a little bit of a motivational talk that I'm going to wing a little bit at the end of this. I thought about doing it right now, and then I'm like, oh yeah, like motivational talk, and then we'll animate a step to the side. This just seems like the wrong momentum. So we'll wrap it up with that because you'll need some motivation after sitting through 3 hours of me talking. So I've downloaded the woman rig to my D drive. You can use any of those rigs, or if you have another rig you'd like, that's fine. I was trying to use something that was a little bit of a non-complicated human character, right? The body mechanics rigs, if you happen to have those, would work really good for this as well. It's actually part of what they're built for. So again, I know you all are familiar with this, but this is just to like that phrase that you need to have like burned into your head. Maya is open. What is the first thing you do? Set your project.
Set your scene.
So, yeah. File. Set project, and then I'm going to go find it. It's on my D drive. Wait, I didn't hit D. D drive, Greg, in class. Yeah, I'm recording. Side step, set, and create default workspace. And that's just, again, good habit to get into, right? See if I can raise my desk a little bit more. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Okay, so now I can go File, Open Scene. I can go to my Workspace root, Woman Rig, Open, don't save. And we could also reference this in. That's a good methodology, but not really 100% required for all projects. And this is just a simple sort of anatomical character, just so we can kind of see a little bit what's going on in the body mechanics. Some of the others are a little bit more like puppet rigs that you can see that as well, but really I wanted to pick a character just so you can see, like, you know, they're not wearing armor, they're not carrying a sword. Like, I want something pretty simple just so we can focus on this character. Now, a couple of things you're probably familiar with, right? Character animation, almost, I would say a good 95% of the time, is pose-to-pose animation, right? And so an element of this means that you want to be in control of that character's pose completely. And we'll go into that a little bit more once we get into Project 1. But that means that as difficult as this is for some people, I want to set a keyframe on every control that this character has. And I know that a lot of people do that by dragging and selecting. And what you just selected was every control that is visible, right? Not every control that the character has. Most good rigs, this is one of the Truong rigs, have this thing right here, this sets, right? And not all of them will have it, but there should be some way that you can pick all of the character controls. And with this, there's a control set. And basically, all of the things under the control set are the controls for this character. And that includes, right now I can see the character's FK arm controls, but this also includes the character's IK arm controls, which are hidden, right? So what I want is I want a button that I can press to select all of those. And I know this is a recap for a lot of people, but if you go down here to your script settings right here, right, click that, open up your script editor, and go to Edit, Clear All. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the main controller, the first one in this control set, and then I'm going to scroll down, hold Shift, select the last one in that set. And now that piece of script right there will allow me to select every control that is in that control set. Okay? I'm going to middle mouse drag that up to my custom shelf and say Mel. And then now if I wanted to, I could also go in here and edit this and make that say all. Right? And so what that means is now I can hit that button and I'm selecting every control on this character's rig. Okay? That is something that I like to have because I'm going to, in the blocking process, I'm going to set a keyframe on every one of those controls, because if I don't, I'm letting Maya make decisions on how things transition, right? I want to nail down that and say, no, I'm the one that's in control of this. I know that sounds like power freak or something like that. Like I have to be in control. But it's that if I don't do that, sometimes things will move and I won't know why, right? If something is moving from pose A to pose B and I set a keyframe on everything, then I know the problem is with me, right? I set the wrong keyframe, or I set the keyframe in a way that is not giving me the result I want. If I'm not doing this, like sometimes it's just because Maya's transitioning it through another keyframe or through another section of the animation that I didn't key in a way that I'm not controlling, right? So, so this is a really handy way for me to be able to just select everything and set a keyframe by hitting S. Again, my personal workflow for that is I also like to turn on auto key. I recognize not everybody agrees with that, and that is completely fine. The reason I do that is if I'm posing for a long time, I want to make sure it's holding those changes I make, but then I still select everything and hit S to set a keyframe, okay? So this is just my little prep before I get started on the shot. I'm going to make a little floor platform here for my character. And then another element of something I do almost all the time when I'm animating is this is the point you pick your camera, okay? I really can't emphasize that enough. In this case, it doesn't seem that important, but later on, like when we start posing this, we're like, it doesn't really matter what it looks like from back here if I'm never showing that to the audience. It doesn't matter if the pose looks good from over here. Like, the pose has to look good from where we're showing it to the audience, right? And so just for me, this is just so I'll have something I can constantly come back to. I usually create a second camera, and then I will often go to layout, do 2 panes side by side. I can let this one be my perspective, and I'll let this one be camera 1. I can put camera 1 where I want it, right? I'm going to put it right about there, and that means I can still tumble around in this one, and I always get to see what it's going to look like to my audience, right? Now, obviously, if I was going to render this, I want to see what that's going to look like in the render, and that would be where I click this button here, and you'll see that the render of this is actually looking like that. That doesn't make any sense. 640 by 480, what? So let's go to our render settings. No. Our render settings, and set this to something that makes more sense, like a HD 720. And you'll see that this is what the actual camera would look like. So I could get that set up to look good for render. And then once I'm happy with where this camera is, right, let me scale out my floor like that, I can lock this camera. And the way I do that is just click that little button, click this little button right here as the camera lock on it. And now I can't accidentally mess up that camera, right? So the way to think of this is now this is my posing camera. This is what my audience is going to see. And this is handy because I can also go in here and turn off everything except for polygons if I want to, right? And now I just get to see what this is going to look like to an early extent for the render, right? Okay. So let's talk about, let me make sure I'm at everything here that I need to do. Yeah, this is a good spot. What I'm going to do now, File, Increment and Save a version of this. So, so really what I'm wanting my character to do is I'm just wanting my character to take a relatively simple step to one side, right? She's standing in one place here. Essentially, when it's all over with, I want her to be like standing over here, right? I'll pose her in more appealing ways, and I'm not actually going to start right now by animating. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use this as sort of a way to lecture about what's actually happening in that step to the side. To make it a little clearer, I'm going to go ahead and put her in a slightly more natural pose, though, just so this weight makes a little bit more sense. So she has her feet spread apart about shoulder length, or shoulder width, right? And so for all like intents and purposes, if we looked at this, this just looks like a person standing there, right? It's kind of a boring pose, but it just looks like a person standing there. So, so if that's the case, let's talk about the physics that's actually going into this person standing there. Hold on one second, see if I can find my, create a new one. Change my color to red so we can see that a little bit better. Okay. So how many of you have already taken physics? All right. So I know that's not everybody's favorite class. I will say that whether it is or not, and whatever bad experiences you had in that class, the reason it's always been required is that there are certain things in it that are concepts you needed to know. So I'm not going to make you do any math in any of this, but I do want to talk about some of those concepts. And these are concepts you probably already knew before you took that class, for some of you. But a lot of them are the laws of motion by Isaac Newton, right? And so we'll refer back to some of that. But let's just think about what's going on here with her standing in this pose, right? So which way is gravity pulling in this? Yeah, generally pulling down, right? Almost always pulling in. I gotta show my grease pencil. Pulling in this direction, right? And so if gravity's pulling in that direction, why is she not collapsing into the floor?
Bone structure.
Sorry, what was that? I heard somebody on the...
Her bone structure is keeping her flesh from collapsing.
Right, so there is the, she has these bones in here that are rigid, right? But she's also pushing, right? Like gravity is pulling her down, and if she were to just like lose all of her energy, she would still just collapse to the ground, right? But what's actually happening in here is she is pushing back against the ground, right? Or pushing back against gravity. She is pushing the floor here, right? And she's pushing the floor here. And because she's pushing with her legs, her hips are going in the opposite direction of gravity, right? Her hips are going up in this direction, right? This is one of those Isaac Newton things, right? That if we, if we did something like this, right, and I were to sort of pose her hand in a way to where she is this, right? We all know what would happen to her body if she pushed against that wall, right? If she were to exert energy in this direction, her body would go in which direction? The opposite, right? So one of the laws of motion, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? To get this like equilibrium of her standing there, she has to be pushing against the ground with the same amount of force that gravity is pulling on her body in order to keep her hips in this equilibrium of standing, right? That's just something that is important to sort of acknowledge with that. You know what? Let me go ahead and undo that hand pose. There we go. So, so since she's pushing against the floor, right? We know that the contact points that are keeping her up off the ground are these 2 feet, right? Her hand isn't touching the ground. It's just those 2 feet that are keeping her off the ground because they're pushing downward, right? And that's pushing her upward. And that means that her weight, push those, we'll shift to it. No, trying to draw with a mouse sucks. Her weight of everything above those 2 bases of support, right, is being supported by her pushing in the opposite direction of gravity, right? So she's staying in balance. Now, if there was like a strong breeze or something, that's an additional force that's happening there, right? Like if the wind was blowing in this direction, we would realize that she would have to exert some energy in the opposite direction in order to not fall over, right? She would have to maybe be pushing in this direction against the wind, right? But that's maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Really, the big thing to recognize is that the way we keep her in balance is to keep all of her weight distributed pretty evenly over that base of support. Does that make sense? So the problem with that is this is how to keep something in balance this is how to keep someone in balance when they're standing still, right? When they're not moving. And that's pretty boring for animation, right? Characters not moving. So our character is going to eventually start moving and throwing themselves out of balance, in and out of balance, and having to correct for that, right? So if we know that her base of support is there, like, look what happens when we just pick up this leg. And when we do this, Alt 1, I'm going to remember that. So now she does not feel imbalanced anymore, right? For her to, and the reason for that is entirely based off of that base of support. Her base of support is no longer this and this. It's just the second one, right? It's just this. And that means that the only thing that is supported is directly, goodness gracious, directly above this line, right? If you were to draw this straight upward, this is the area that is being supported. I need to hook this Cintiq up and bring a pen up here to do this. This is the area that's being supported above that base of support, and that means all of this area over here is not being supported. It's not, like, this foot is not pushing back against the ground anymore, right? But gravity is still pulling on it. You with me? So I know all that makes sense, but because of that, that means she is completely out of balance now. That means gravity is still pulling here, right? And since there's like a fulcrum here, like there's a point of contact there, it's going to make her body fall in this direction. So this is sort of a fundamental element of learning how to move, right? It's why babies take a year to learn to walk, is that when you pick that leg up, you're suddenly out of balance and you're going to fall over. And so we have to learn how to keep our body in balance as we're moving, right? So for this character to stay in balance, there's a couple of different things we have to do, right? Obviously we could put that foot back down, right? That would work. But really what we're trying to do is keep everything over that base of support, over the base of support of this foot, right? So there's a couple of ways we could do that. We could just shift our character's weight over that foot more, right? And so now she feels much more in balance. And again, the reason for that is because that base of support here, now if you go straight up above that, you'll see that she's more evenly balanced down the center of that, right? And even if she is sort of hanging off on each side, she's evenly balanced on that, right? She's teetering across that point of support. So it's also important to recognize that angle is part of that, right? Like even if we pushed her over that base of support, right? If we did something like this pose, right? She still feels off balance. And that's because that leg that's sticking out there, this leg right here, is still being pulled down by gravity. And it just feels like she's, even though the majority of her weight is over that, it feels like she's off balance. We've thrown off the weight and she's going to tip over to one side or the other. So one of the ways we could sort of fix that is to just to sort of counterbalance her a little bit, right? Something like this. So maybe we could try to keep her in balance in some other way. Of course, these aren't the best poses in the world, right? But maybe just by doing something like this, we're able to keep her a little bit more in balance, right? All right. So all of this is kind of fundamentals of things that we understand about the way physics works. Like, we probably didn't have to go through here and talk about all of these, but it did. Let me just undo to get back to my default pose. But that's the problem, is that a lot of people in character animation, when they first start character animation, oh goodness, how many undos do I got? They don't think about that. That has to happen every time your character moves, right? For your character to ever pick up their foot, you have to move that weight off of the foot that is off of that foot that you're going to pick up in order to redistribute the weight, right? So let's talk about that. Just that movement of going from here to over to here, right? Maybe picking up this foot, right? Just that process, just the process of shifting your weight to the side. That also requires physics. It requires forces, right? Because when that character's weight shifts to the side, if I'm moving it like this, it's very obvious what's moving it, right? My mouse is dragging it over here, dragging it over here, and dragging it over here. That's not how physics really works, right? My hips are not moving because some invisible force is pushing on them. My hips are moving because my feet are pushing against the ground, right? And so for my character's hips to move over this way, she has to push on the ground downward, right? And because of the force of friction on the ground, right? If she were standing on ice, this wouldn't work, right? Because of the force of friction, she's also pushing in this direction when she pushes downward. And that's what drives her hips in this direction, right? If she's not pushing against that, her hips are not going to go in that direction. Now that video I'm going to share with you in a bit, he really talks about that a lot, right? That if your character is in this pose, right? How do they push in that direction? Right? It's really like they can't push this way, like in this angle or toward this direction, because their foot is pointing this way, right? So the only option they have is to fall down. Well, it's not the only option they have. The other option of how you might do that is to throw your balance in that direction, right? And so you would see somebody maybe do something like this, lean in this direction in order to now have their balance pulling them off to this side, right? In order for them to start getting that momentum of the hips moving in that direction. So physics of this, the physics of body mechanics is actually really more complicated than you might think, right? Because even if a little bit of this is off, the viewer will recognize it. They'll be like, something didn't feel right about how those hips just moved, right? So, questions so far? Comments? Anything you're seeing in this that you want to talk about?
So how do we characterize body mechanics then?
What do you mean characterize it?
Like just worrying about the body mechanics seems complicated enough. How do we add personality to body mechanics?
So I would treat it the other way. Body mechanics is something that it's a foundational idea that you get into your head that allows you to communicate that higher level idea of performance, right? In the same way that you, when you're writing your English paper now, you're trying to convey a very complex thesis, right? And you're not still having to go, how do I draw an A again? What does an A look like anymore? Like eventually, the more you start to think about this, the more you layer this into the things that you're doing every day, the more that this becomes like just your understanding of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons I'm kind of boiling it down to as simple as it can be.
Okay.
So what you would do is you would think about the performance, and then as you're developing that performance or as you're posing that performance, you're like, oh, my character needs to go to the left. Well, you have to have that pose set up in a way that the character can push themselves to the left, right?
Yeah.
And if not, then maybe you have to. That's one of the reasons we do this blocking pass that we're we're
Yeah.
blocking in all of our key poses to allow that to happen. So one other thing that I would like to point out, right? My character, let's say we're going to do the opposite of this, right? My character is in this pose, and I want her to get back to this pose, right? So, well, no, let me back up, right? So we talked about that for the character to push her hips over to this side, right? She has to be pushing against the ground. So that means that this doesn't work. If I set a keyframe here, and then I set another keyframe here, where I've moved my character over, right, and pulled my character's leg up. I mean, I have two very reasonable poses, right? The character is standing there in balance. The character is standing there in balance. Let's go ahead and push her up a little bit more here. So here's the problem with that, is that in between that, if we start scrubbing through that, you'll see that the character's hips start moving and the foot starts moving at the same time, right? To show that this character is actually pushing her hips over, that can't happen. Because as soon as that foot comes off the ground, nothing is pushing those hips anymore, right? Nothing is pushing to the side, nothing is pushing down. Gravity takes over and she falls, right? For this to work, this foot has to stay on the ground and continue to push for a little longer. Right? So what I would maybe do is I'm just going to copy the keyframe on that foot and move it over there. And you'll see now she's pushing herself over, and then the foot can come up. Right? This actually works in the opposite way as well. For her to go back to this key pose, right, I'm going to just go ahead and move this out to here, copy all, hit S. For her to get back to this pose, watch what happens as she's moving in that direction. The foot's going out there to catch her, but the foot gets to that end location and her hips get to that end location at exactly the same frame. So what stopped her? Like, what stopped her movement to the side? If her foot wasn't there yet, like, we can only assume it's magic, right? What has to happen for her to stop is this foot has to get back into that pose earlier, right? So we have to be able to get that foot out there and catch her in order for that leg to start pushing against the ground and pushing against that friction in order to slow her sideways motion, right? So this is something that when we do this, like, we can kind of see it. Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted. Playback speed, real time. So you can kind of see it. And of course I could stretch it out a little bit more and we could get that. But you can kind of see that now it feels like she's pushing on the ground in order to get her hips over there, and the foot's coming back out in order to catch her to slow her down here. Now, something else you have to be careful of, if she pushes really hard to get her hips over to here, then you have to ask yourself what's going to stop her hips from continuing on past this and her falling still yet, right? She would push just hard enough to where she would kind of run out of energy right as she was over that foot of balance, right? And so that's where timing and spacing all come into play, right? If you want that to feel like it's easing to a stop, you have to ease into those keyframes as well. Everybody with me? Is this making sense? Okay. So again, I know I'm kind of boiling this down to some foundational stuff, but I think that that's why we really need to kind of look at this as an exercise, right? So I'm going to delete all these keys, and I'm going to show you roughly the keyframes that you need, okay? You need your character in a neutral pose. Let me, let's do this again. What? Oh wait, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted Notepad. And on Notepad, I'm going to start writing the names of the poses. Okay. Way too much. So we need a neutral pose, right? And then we need our character to push themselves over this leg, right? So we need a push pose. And then we need the pose where the character's foot is off the ground. Okay, so let me move this around a little bit where I can see it better. There we go. So then we would have a foot up pose, right? And this you would maybe hold just a little bit, right? You get to that pose and you would hold it just for a little while, right? So at this point, the character needs to cross over to their other pose. Now, this is probably something you're aware of, but I feel the need to reiterate this as much as I can. This control right here, this is the placement control under this character. It's called main, right? Don't ever move that, right? Or at least not while you're animating. Right? You can move it to get the character in their starting position or whatever, but that's not how we're going to animate our character moving from side to side. And the reason is pretty obvious here, which is like if I move this, the character's feet are moving too, right? So that means if I'm animating this, the character, I'm never going to be able to get the character's feet to stick to the ground, right? So the next pose across is going to be our character intentionally throwing themselves off balance in order to get a contact pose for their second location, right? So essentially, I'm going to do something really quick and ugly. It would look something like this, right? Like she's sort of leaning over to get that foot in the location so it can now be her new base of support, right? And once that foot is there, and like of course we're gonna be posing this character much more dynamically, right? Maybe the pose would look something more like this, right? Couple of things I would show you on this rig that are actually really handy. One is the head has this global control. I would turn that on, turn that all the way to 10. The reason for that is now when I rotate the chest, that head stays in that right orientation. The same with the arms. The arm should have, oh, maybe it's in the clavicle. Oh, does it not have one? Oh, come on. Oh, that's a pain in the butt. If I'd have realized that, I don't know that I would have picked this one. So a lot of times the arms will have that control as well. This one doesn't, so that's going to make this one a little bit choppier to animate. But it's all right. Not all rigs have that anyway. So of course, maybe we're going to clean up this pose a little bit more, so it's a little bit more makes more sense, right? But sort of this contact pose right there, right? So this is the we'll call this like crossing contact, right? And so now, after we get this pose, our character needs a push, right? Since their foot is over here ready to take that weight, now they basically need to push their weight with this foot across, right? Something like this, right? So we'll call that shifting weight to new foot. And then now that that weight is over here on this foot, right, this foot can come off the ground, right? So the next pose is going to be our character kind of pushing themselves up this way. Now, of course, they're out of balance again because of this pose, so we got to kind of start correcting for all of that, right? Something like this, right? So this is this is actually probably the shifting weight to new foot, crossing contact. I feel like This is actually would be called shifting your weight to the new foot. Really, the other is, no, maybe that makes sense. Let's call it pushing weight to new foot. And then this is other foot up, right? And then finally, the character can't just sort of shift their weight back to neutral until this foot is on the ground, right? So we have to get our foot, let's see, we'll call this planting foot. And then finally, which is basically this foot on the ground again, right? And then finally, the last is settling into new pose, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 poses just to get our character to take a step to the side, right? Now, hopefully these make sense, and I'm recording this so you'll get the idea of that. But I can leave this up here for a little while if you just want to copy those down. Watching through this video again, I think will help you clearly understand what those are. So here's the other element of this. Every pose that I just made, I made a really ugly version of it, right? It really was not a good pose. So all of you went through animation fundamentals at least, right? Most of you have been through character, or a lot of you have been through character animation before. And so you remember that lecture that Laura gives in Animation Fundamentals about crafting a good pose, right? The contrapposto, line of action, silhouette, right? That Benbot pose you had to craft, every pose should be something. There's an animator in one of these videos that I want to share with you later who says every one of these videos, every one of your poses is something you, in fact, I'll probably just go ahead and put that in the thing we're going to look at, or the notes, the news today. He said every pose in your animation, you should be able to pause it at any point, and that should be a pose that is worthy of being printed off and hung above your desk, right? Like that's what you should be thinking about this. Like you're crafting every frame of this animation to be an appealing pose. Now, the pose-to-pose process means if you make the neutral pose and you make that a beautiful pose, right? And then you make the push pose a beautiful pose and the foot up pose a beautiful pose. All of those frames in between are going to be less bad, right? They may not be perfect, but they're going to be less bad and way easier for you to get those to that beautiful pose too, right? And so that's really why crafting these poses as well as you possibly can is a really important element of this, right? Okay, questions? Comments?
For the exercise, do we need to make it look more straightforward as far as side to side, or can we stylize it, or how does that work?
Oh no, you can stylize it. Like if you want to do it a little bit more of a cartoony one or something like that, I'm fine with that. It doesn't have to be super vanilla. Like you can make her really reach for it if you want to. In all honesty, the physics, it's like a walk cycle, right? Like is it a really like personality filled walk or is it a vanilla walk? The physics is pretty much the same in all of it. All of these elements are important to make that step happen. Really the only difference between that is like the timing and how much you're pushing the poses. I would say that even if you're going cartoony, try to still, at least for this exercise, try to still stay in a or if you're going exaggerated, try to stay in a believable level of physics, right? So, okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go over the next couple of days. I'll block out my version of that step to the side, right? And you'll block out your version of it. And let's see. So for the exercise, we're looking for a more sturdy, straightforward side step. I think this is a very similar question to to what Brad just asked. Yeah, but yes, it can be a little cartoony if you want it to. I just, probably not like Looney Tunes cartoony, right? Okay. So go ahead and block those out. I will go ahead and in just a few minutes, I'll post the video for JD Haas and his version of talking about balance, because I think he has a couple of extra notes in there that are really important. And I'll share another clip. It's for a class that this guy is trying to sell, but he has some really good notes on pose about why they're important. It's the guy that I just mentioned. And so I'll put those in the news section here in just a minute. So, all right. So I do want to just talk a little bit about, I guess, our current situation, right? Before I jump into that, again, this isn't due for another week, but try to come in next class period with your blocking. And that way, maybe one of the first things we could do is even have like a little breakout session with your mentors, which I'll hopefully have the list of the mentors at that point, just so we can kind of continue moving forward with that. There's a chance that you make this into a really strong piece, and it could even be a portfolio piece. Okay, so in case y'all haven't heard, there's a pandemic and the world is on fire, right? Yeah, did you hear about that? Somebody posted about it on Facebook. So, sorry. So I feel like it's important to bring that up, right? Obviously, we have to still be diligent about this. I know you all are working from home. While we're here, we have to wear the masks, and we have to wash our hands a lot. We have to use hand sanitizer. We have to be very diligent about all of that for at least a little while longer. I do think that that it's getting better, but I recognize that everything that we do now seems to be under this shadow of everything is terrible in the world. Oh my goodness, what's going on? Why even try, right? And no matter how maybe excited we might be right now to start a new semester, sort of that ambiance of the world starts to sink in a little bit. And I really noticed it last semester in all my classes that, I had more people who just pretty much just dropped out on me last semester than any other semester. I really felt like it was one of those situations where we were having to kind of drag people across the finish line, right? And I think that a part of that may be coming from just that constant bombardment of that. I really hope that it's getting better. Like if you look at the numbers, I get this spreadsheet from a doctor friend of mine. The numbers are continuing to decline. There's still, lots of other things in the news to be very upset about, obviously. But I personally believe that that's going to start getting a little better as well. Either way, I don't want that to be the shadow that this entire semester is under. And I know there's only so much of that we can do anything about. But one of the things I did want to talk about is sort of reasons to maybe look on the, dude, it's such a cheesy phrase, like to look on the bright side, or to like count your blessings, or like some variation of that, right? And I think it's because like when we see all that stuff hitting us, right, it becomes very, it makes the mountain we have to climb look so much taller, right? It feels like, oh crap, we're all the way down here at the bottom. Look how tall that mountain is. I'm never going to make it to the top, right? I need you all to recognize that you're not at the bottom of the mountain, okay? And I think that that's one of the benefits of sort of really looking honestly at how fortunate we are right now. Anybody ever heard of the 100 People Project? It's basically a way of thinking about statistics. Is if you said the entire world's population were just 100 people, like what would that look like, right? And it's stuff like 12 of those people, their primary language would be Chinese, right? Only 5 of them, their primary language would be English. And I think that we start to look at that and we start to realize that like we're all sitting at a university right now in a world with clean drinking water, when only 40 of those people would have internet access. Only 7 people of that 100 people would be college graduates, and you're all soon going to be one of those 7 people, right? We're not at the bottom of that mountain. We are we are really high up that mountain right now. And I want you to, despite, like, there are still very valid reasons to be very upset about stuff that's going on in the world right now. And I'm not telling you to ignore that. I'm telling you to reassure yourself that this is doable, right? That we can, you can overcome this because you're already so far up that mountain, right? I read the other day, this is a statistic that just blew my mind, right? If you were to take every person in the world who has ever died, like all of the dead people who have ever died in the history of the world, a third of them would have died from malaria. Like that one disease, malaria, right? And I bet none of you were even worried about malaria today, right? Like that's just my guess. We live in a country where we have clean drinking water. The majority of us are living indoors. I'm hoping everybody is. If you're not, please contact me. We will do something about that. Whereas in the real world, like 22 people of that 100 people project, right? They would literally not have shelter to sleep in tonight, right? So we are way up that mountain, right? We're not at the top yet. We're not at the point that you want to be, and I understand that goal still feels a long way away. And that's why I have that talk in this class, because this is like, not only are you fortunate in that way that you have clean drinking water today, you're fortunate in that way that you're in college, but you're also fortunate in that way that you chose a major that I'm really confident you're going to be happy with the job it gives you, right? With the career you've chosen, you get to do something that you don't hate, right? You get to get paid good money to do something that is really fun to do, right? And I recognize that everybody in this class, it's usually a mix of people. There's usually some people from another concentration who are taking this class to inform something else in their concentration, right? Maybe your game design or your visualization, and you're doing this class so you learn a little bit more about character, right? Or something like that. There's a portion of you who are an animation concentration, but character animation's not it for you. I know Emily's really wants to do effects. There's always these portions of people. But usually a large percentage of the people who are in this class say what they want to do is character animation. I would bet it's somewhere between a third to half of you, right? And this is the only class that we have that offers that, right? This is the class for that. And I think it's worth reminding you that you are so far up that mountain, you are so close to that, but this last push, right, to get your work to a point to where it is strong enough that when you graduate, you can go out there and compete against other character animators and get those jobs. It's a hard push, right? And you have to put a lot of effort into it. And I really don't want the vile crap that's out there in the world right now keeping you from having that, right? I don't want that to ruin that as well for you, right? So I'm hoping that maybe thinking of the positive, thinking of how fortunate we are to even have the opportunity for this to be hard for us, right? To be able to fight through this character animation class. I tell you that because if character animation is one of the things you want to do, you really need to prioritize this class. I'm not telling you to disregard your other classes unless you just have to. But if it's between like, oh, I gotta get that English paper written, or oh, I gotta get good at character animation so I can have a happy life, like do the animation thing. This is what you want to do. This is where you should be throwing your energy, right? Get that English paper done too. Like, I understand you have to do these other things, but this will be a hard semester for you because there's a lot of work that is not easy work, right? And I think that going into it saying, I just have to get through that. I just have to get over this next hurdle. I have to get past that next hurdle. And then there's a whole lot that opens up to you. I want to keep reminding you that it's not that like, oh, I'm all the way at zero and I have to get all the way to the top. No, you just need to get past this next hurdle, and stuff gets easier. It gets better, right? So I don't know. This was not a very organized talk. This is more of like I wanted you to be thinking about that. And the reason is because I've seen so many people in the past who really just kind of phone this class in. And then I'm like, what do you want to do? And they're like, I want to do character animation. And I'm like, well, you're not going to be able to if you're just going to phone this class in. That's not going to get you the job. So I'm kind of asking you to take the initiative and to really hit this hard, like to really like fight hard for this class. I think that it will pay off if you do. And I've done this before. Like I was in your seat before, right? And now I'm a professional character animator and teacher of character animation. I can get you there. I will help you get there. Like we can do this, but I can only do a small percentage of it. The most of the work is on you all. I'll be here to help you however I can, right? So, questions about anything before we kind of close the class down? I think there's another class probably lining up to get in now. So
Wait, what time is class? 2 o'clock, right?
it's 2:15, 2:05. Yeah, I think this class ends at 2:05, and then the next one starts at 2:15. So
I'm so confused.
you're in the second section of it, right?
I don't know.
I think you are. I think you're early for the next class, Katie, but that's fine. Hang around.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns, conundrums, other C words, cookies? All right then. I'm excited to see where this goes this semester. We got a lot of animators, so I'm excited to see some animation. I'll see y'all. See y'all Thursday. That's the day. Again, if you're repeating the class, try to bring in a list of what it is you're planning on doing. Everybody else, a blocked out version of your step to the side. So. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
And
Thank you.
these will be uploaded to the Greg Marlowe Learning YouTube page if you need to go back and watch any of this again in a minute. See y'alls.